This time on Watchers of Tomorrow, Curtis and the Snow Train Factory.
Hello everyone, my name is Gep and I am joined as always by my good friend Dr. Izzy.
Hi.
And this week we took a break from Star Trek again and watched a sci-fi movie that I know Izzy is just super excited about.
Yeah.
It's Snowpiercer.
Yeah, Snowpiercer. It's one of my favorite movies, I think.
It's a very, very interesting one. We're going to do a slight departure since Izzy was so excited about this and it was his pick. He decided to take over the synopsis this week.
So buckle in. It's going to be weird.
Yeah, I don't know. There's something about this movie. I want to love it. I really, really want to love it. And I've seen it like 2-3 times now. And there's something in there that keeps me from making it one of my top movies. And I've been very unable to identify what it is.
Well, maybe we'll be able to explore and figure out a little bit more what's gotten you there.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, could it be that like nobody's like 100% innocent here? Maybe.
No, that's fine. That's life.
Could it be the dramatic stylings of it?
Some of that. I think something about the way the fight scenes are filmed gets me a little, but I have a feeling that's intentional.
A little bit. They are, I guess, kind of meant to be very brutal. And that might not be necessarily everyone's thing. So it's very visceral, you could say.
Well, I feel like we should just jump in because I think this is going to be a longer one, both with just the movie being a little longer and it having more kind of thematic depth than some of the stuff we've talked about recently.
Yes. So I'll kick us off. The movie opens with a series of radio transmissions from 2014 with voices talking about an effort to stop global warming by releasing a chemical called CW7. After a couple shots of airplanes, we shift to a frozen dark scene. Words appear informing us that after the CW deployment, the world froze, and we are told of those who boarded the traveling ark. Most of the movie is set on a train. We find out over the course of the film that the train travels around a circuit of rail lines all across the world, making the trip once every year. The exterior world is inhospitable, but life continues inside the train, carrying the last humanity in a fully closed, self-propelled system. At the front is the engine, where the owner of the train, the mastermind behind its construction, operates the engine. His name is Wilford. Behind the engine are a series of cars carrying people, starting with first-class passengers near the front, economy further back, and behind that the unticketed. The back is where our story begins. Those in back live in squalor, effectively a slum that makes a coffin hotel look roomy. The year is 2031, and there is a guard counting the crowd. Passengers sit down as they are tallied, but one man remains standing, but he's watching the gates leading to the next car. This man is named Curtis. The guard asks about experienced violinists. As the passengers collect protein jello bars of some sort, their only source of food, an elderly man named Gerald comes forward. After some questions, Gerald finds out his wife wouldn't be able to come along. There's a scuffle and Gerald is taken off. Curtis goes to a lady named Tanya and her very young son, Timmy. After some negotiations, Curtis gets a hold of Timmy's protein bar. Tanya asks Curtis if it's time. He says, soon. At the back of the train, Curtis cuts open the bar and finds a message capsule. With him is Gilliam, an older man who is missing a couple limbs. The capsule message, Namgoon Minsu. He's a security expert held in the prison section. They are joined by Edgar while they plan. Curtis' standing earlier was to see how long the gates were open for. They'd have 4 seconds to get through 3 gates and get to Namgoon. Gilliam asks Curtis what happens if they get to the engine. Curtis explains he'd kill Wilford. Gilliam rejects taking Wilford's place. Curtis doesn't want to be leader either. Even one suggested by Edgar. Guards come in, claiming a medical check. They separate the kids from the rest, and a lady in a fancy yellow coat appears. Her name is Claude. After an attempt to hide Timmy, he is grabbed, measured, and taken away. On their way out, a man named Andrew throws a shoe at Claude before he is wrestled down to the ground. Later, Andrew is surrounded by guards and train officials. The officials say they only need 7 minutes at this altitude. They put Andrew's arm out a hole in the side of the train. A lady with false teeth and a fur coat comes forward. Her name is Mason. Mason is very disappointed. As Andrew screams, she gives a speech. Mason makes an odd gesture with the thrown shoe. Forward, turn back, return. She then puts the shoe on Andrew's head, moving on to lecture about the proper place people on the train. Included is lots of praise to the sacred engine, a repeat of that hand gesture, and lots of talking down. One of the suited men extracts Andrew. His arm is frozen solid. One hammering later, he's down an arm. Mason sees Gilliam. He asks to give a message to Wilford, but Mason is dismissive. Later, barrels of materials are collected as Curtis negotiates for a box of a substance called crenole. Crenole is an industrial waste that causes hallucinations and is highly flammable. Later, Gilliam and Curtis watch the guards. Curtis poses the idea that the guards don't actually have any bullets. A man draws as a pillar of barrels is assembled. The artist gives Andrew and Tanya sketches of their kids, Timmy and Andy. Alarms and scrambling. The doors open, the guards head in to start counting once more. Edgar distracts by yelling about the food situation. A guard grabs a man and threatens to shoot him. Curtis waits for the gates to open. When the last gate opens, Curtis runs to the guard, pulls the barrel to his head. The guard pulls the trigger. Click, but no bang. The passengers rush forward, pushing the pillar forward, jamming the 3 gates. A fight ensues. A large guard blocks the way forward, but taken down by a man covered in tattoos named Gray. Prison section taken, keys in hand, they find Namgoon inside a drawer, marked as a crenole addict. Waking him up, they discover he doesn't speak English. They use a translator device to indicate that they want to make a deal. He opens the gates, they give him crenole. Through the use of the second-to-last cigarette in the world as a distraction, Namgoon grabs the keys and opens another drawer. It's his daughter Yona. He demands 2 crenole per gate. Curtis agrees. As they ready to open the next gate, Yona comments that there's nobody there. It opens, revealing the guard quarters. It is in fact empty. It has windows, and we get our first good look of the world frozen outside. They pass a train station with dozens of people, frozen solid, scrambling for another train. The next car has a man named Paul dangling from a pipe valve. The passengers know this guy, and this is where the protein bars are made. Paul is resistant to join the revolt. This is also where we discovered the source of the protein bars. Looking inside the machinery, they find a vat of insects. Curtis and the artist, the only 2 who looked, opt not to eat the freshly produced bars, while the rest of everyone else eats. Paul drops a capsule. After a conversation, it's revealed that Paul's been given the message to pass on. This one says, water. After all, a couple cars forward is water control. Curtis talks with Yona, and we find out a bit of information about both of them, including that Curtis very much doesn't want to remember life before meeting Gilliam. Yona warns about opening the next gate, but it opens, revealing a car full of masked men in ski masks, carrying axes. A fight begins. It is intense, but stops suddenly when a horn is heard. A man on a megaphone announces that they are at the Yatakarina Bridge. Everyone stops fighting. The axemen enthusiastically count down and shout, "Happy New Year!" Curtis spots a large flow of ice blocking the tracks out the window. The train collides, and there's much shaking as they go through more blockages, nearly derailing the train. During this, Namgoon and Yuna look out the window at a crashed plane off the side of the bridge. The fight continues until Mason appears with 2 large-suited men. They are both named Franco, the younger and the elder. Mason berates again and informs everyone that precisely 74% of them shall die. She and the axemen pull out night vision goggles. The train enters a tunnel. Cast in darkness, the passengers are helpless, until Curtis remembers the matches from Namgoon's cigarette case. Soon, the passengers have torches and can avoid being outright slaughtered. Curtis charges Mason, but sees Edgar being grabbed by Franco the Younger. Curtis gives up on Edgar. Edgar is killed, and Curtis captures Mason. Mason calls for a stop. Franco the Younger is killed trying to escape by a spear. The fighting is over, and Gilliam comes forward. Tanya grills Mason about the missing kids. Mason professes innocence, but that Wilford would know all about them. Gilliam says Wilford only cares about the engine, Mason pokes holes in their plan to control the water supply. After it only controls the water in the back. Mason offers that she can help get to the front and get to Wilford in exchange for her life. And if they get there, they have to kill Wilford. Gilliam talks to Curtis about this plan. Curtis suggests he go forward with Mason as a hostage, while the rest handle things in the back and watch over the prisoners. Curtis rejects leadership again. Gilliam points out he's already their leader, if he likes it or not. There's a joke about having 2 good arms making Curtis unqualified to lead. Gilliam inspects a scar on Curtis's arm, implying that perhaps he almost lost it at one point. Gilliam talks about the benefits of having 2 arms, such as holding a woman. This is an important point, by the way. Gilliam also warns to not let Wilford talk, to cut out his tongue. Mason is in shackles, standing with Curtis, Andrew, and Tanya. Andrew puts a shoe on Mason's head. They, Namgoon, Gray, and Yona, start moving forward. They are the party for the remainder of the movie. The next car is a greenhouse, and the next is an aquarium. There's a sushi bar, and they stop to eat. Mason explains it's a close ecological system, and that a balance must be maintained, so sushi is limited and only served twice a year. Next is a freezer car, and after that is a classroom. Tanya and Andrew look for their kids, but they are not there. One of the kids says they saw them being taken forward. The teacher turns on a video. It has exposition and propaganda, a lot we have already explained. The info dump continues as the teacher talks about how people were critical of Wilford, who apparently knew about the dangers of CW7. This is followed by a hymn about the dangers of going outside, complete with piano accompaniment. The teacher calls the students to the window to see the frozen people from a previous revolt. Namgoon tells Yuna that he knew one of the people in that revolt, an Inuit lady, who taught him all about the different types of snow. Suddenly a man appears, wheeling a cart filled with eggs. The egg man hands out the eggs before going further back. Curtis spots a message capsule in his egg. It says, blood. The egg man gets the passengers in the back. The egg man and the teacher in the classroom pull out SMGs and start shooting. Andrew is killed. The egg man overturns his cart, wheeling more guns, and frees some of the captured guards. Gray kills the teacher. The TV comes on, and there's a video feed of Franco killing Gilliam. Curtis grabs the gun and kills Mason. Next car is a passenger car. The next is a tailor and dentist. Next is a lounge with richly dressed people. Franco reaches the classroom with a couple of the guards. Franco looks out the window and notices the train making a large turn on a looping track. He sets his sight on the party further up the train, and soon gunfire is exchanged between the cars in a rather intense scene. The party passes the pool to get to the sauna. Franco enters the sauna. There's a sound, and Franco fires, killing a front section passenger, and then a guard who complains about that. Then the full fight starts, and leaves Franco on the ground with a knife in his gut, and Tanya dead. Forward is the dance club. Namgoon sees Cronole grabs all he can, annoying the party goers. Yona grabs a bottle of wine. Namgoon also grabs 2 fur coats. The next car has electronics behind cages. The mechanical area begins the next section, the last before the engine. Namgoon asks for his Cronole. There's a bit of a scuffle as Curtis is just so done with everything. In the end, though, Namgoon asks Curtis what his deal is. Curtis explains his experience during the early days of the train. 1,000 people with no food or water in the back car. After a month, they ate the week. And he reveals that he knows what people taste like, and that babies taste the best. He goes into a story about a lady with a baby, and how men with knives killed her and took the baby, but an old man stepped forward, offering his own arm up instead. The baby was Edgar, and Curtis was the man with the knife, and the old man was Gilliam. Others followed Gilliam's example, but Curtis simply couldn't. A month later, the protein bars appeared. Namgoon thanks Curtis for the story, but he doesn't want to open the gate to the engine. He wants to go outside. Curtis is skeptical about survival. Namgoon asks, what if they don't freeze to death? He explains that the plane he looked at the Yatakarina Bridge, and how, over the years, it was becoming more and more uncovered. You see, the snow is starting to melt. Namgoon points out that the cannoli is flammable and can be used as explosive. This whole time, he's been building a bomb. He puts the smushed together cannoli on the door and demands a match. Curtis rejects this as the gate to the engine starts to open. Claude appears and shoots Namgoon. She takes the bomb and ushers Curtis inside. After measuring the bomb, that is. Yona is asleep on the floor and thus ignored. Curtis meets Wilford in a spacious, fancy silver room. Wilford congrats Curtis. There's some banter. Wilford says it's not so great up at the front. You know, up here where it's quiet and, oh, it is noisy. Curtis points out the luxuries, and then Wilford starts talking about preordained positions, and how Curtis is out of place. He's not in his position, and he asks Curtis if he would trade places with him. Wilford says that they are all prisoners in a closed ecosystem that must be kept in balance. Water, air, food, people kept in the right numbers. Hence the drastic population reductions, the revolts, the revolutions. This cuts back to the Eggman executing people. Wilford then explains that usually they can get, on with just individual units killing each other, but sometimes more is needed, incited violence. But the play with the torch to the tunnel was a surprise for their planned course of the revolt. Wilford explains that Gilliam and he were in cahoots. They planned this all together, that they were friends and had both in on it, and that they expected it to end after the Yadok Arena tunnel fight. Curtis is skeptical. Wilford calls the Eggman to tally the numbers. Claude confirms that the 74% number from earlier still is in effect. There's more shooting. Curtis slams the table. Claude fires a warning shot, calling words from Wilford that lead to questions about Curtis getting laid. Wilford then repeats Gilliam's words about having two arms, being good for holding a woman. Curtis now believes that the claim that Wilford and Gilliam worked together is true. They did know each other. Franco, not quite dead from the fight in the sauna, rises and pulls a knife from his gut. Yona wakes up as the clubbers begin to attack. Namgoon, recovered slightly from his gunshot, fights them off and calls Yuna to open the engine gate to get that bomb. After more prognostications, Wilford takes Curtis into the engine tunnel as it stirs. It's loud outside, but not here. Wilford asks, when was the last time Curtis had been alone? He lets Curtis enjoy the isolation. Curtis falls to his knees and weeps. Wilford presents Curtis the last message capsule. Train. He offers Curtis control to keep the order. Franco moves to the clubbers as Yuna opens the engine gate. Claude investigates and gets a wine bottle to the head from Yona. Wilford directs Curtis to the violent scene and back, pushing the story that people are just violent and only Curtis can save them. Yona goes to Curtis for the matches, but Curtis pushes her away. Yona then senses something. One bit of prying later, we find Timmy working to clean a pipe amidst a set of complex gears on the floor. Wilford explains that the space needs a small child to replace a part that was broken. Curtis clocks Wilford and then sticks his arm in the mechanism. He hands Yona the matches as the engine starts to shut down. But the engine changes modes, and another child, Andy, climbs out of the wall as the engine extends a section forward. Andy crawls inside and it retracts. Wilford does the odd hand gesture from earlier, the same gesture Timmy must do to clean the pipe. Namgoon breaks Franco's neck. Yona lights the fuse. Curtis extracts Timmy as his arm is severed. Namgoon tries to shut the gate door, but fails. Curtis and Namgoon hug Timmy and Yuna to protect them for what is to come. Wilford says nice, and Claude wakes up right next to the bomb, right before it explodes. Fire fills the engine. The explosion starts an avalanche on the mountainside above the tracks. The snow slams into the train. The train derails, tumbles and skids to a halt. Cars falling off into the cliffs, off a cliff. Others getting slammed into a tunnel. Yona and Timmy wake. They are the only survivors in the engine. They are soon outside in the fur coats that Namgoon collected. The sun is bright. The air is cold, but not deadly. They see in the distance a polar bear climbing a mountain ridge. Clearly, life can survive outside in the world once again. The end.
Oh, very nice.
Wowzers.
I know I didn't talk much during that thing, but you did a pretty good job on that one, so I think we have plenty of time now to discuss all the science and philosophy you wanted.
Hooray! I was a little worried there. So the word count's a little higher than our usual descriptions. In fact, it's about twice your usual.
I guess I just read slow.
I when I'm excited about things, I tend to speak and read quickly. So I guess that maybe something going in my favor here.
Well, that's fine. Well, there's obviously a lot of symbolism in this movie. There's obviously a lot of social commentary in this movie. I want to say the one thing that I've always loved about this movie and why I like it as a sci-fi movie is none of it makes any sense.
Nope.
It's just very clearly saying, like, this world doesn't have to function. The train is a metaphor for social classes of society. Go.
Yep. It's this is all of humanity, literally, in the context of the movie, wrapped up in a confined space, being forced to interact in a particular fashion. Now, go. Go down that track perpetually, forever, right?
Yeah, there's been a bit of criticism of the movie just being too blatant with its themes. I feel on a surface level analysis that can definitely be a little bit true, but being that blatant with the themes you're working with means you can get an interesting amount of depth in there.
Yes, in fact, there's depth in both the the commentary as well as all these sort of small details in the movie. Like when I talked about the a couple of small details, like the Gilliam's words about holding a woman with two arms, and then that coming up later. That's sort of the tip of the iceberg as far as small details that kind of are running themes with certain characters. Like Claude measuring people and measuring things. Like she's measuring things up. She's sort of part of the mechanism of the society that is trying to sort of determine how things fit into places.
Yeah, and you have there's so many that I just kept missing some. I was doing some reading, and the bridge fight near the beginning, it's just like everyone in the bridge fight who attacks the rebels is wearing masks. Like, they're literally faceless oppressors.
Yep. And I kind of didn't draw too much attention to a lot of the details of that particular fight, but there's sort of this ritual thing that they do with the fish. They like bloody their axes, sort of I guess pre-gaming violence in a way.
Yeah, I was reading a lot about that, which depending on which school of critique you want to go with, there's either like a very literal interpretation that was mentioned by the director in interviews, or there's a lot of kind of symbolic interpretations that weren't necessarily what he meant in the movie. But there was a lot of stuff on he wanted there to be sort of a barbaric, ritualistic tone to the violence. So like It's not random, it's pre-planned. They're doing this ritual before it to intimidate the people that they're about to fight, and it's kind of mixing this very, very structured form of violence and oppression with this very what we would consider barbaric practice of ritualizing violent assault.
Yeah, and habit and ritual is kind of very much caked into a lot of the society in the train there. And so I guess in some ways it would be kind of weird if they didn't do something like that, honestly.
Yeah, a little bit. But did you want to get more into the philosophy and symbolism first, or I knew you wanted to discuss some science stuff?
Well, yeah, there's very much two big directions we can go here. So let's go with the most important, I think, for our world today aspect, and that is geoengineering.
Yes, the C something chemical.
Yes, CW7. So in the context of the movie, CW7 is a chemical that is supposed to, through some mechanism, help reduce global warming. Now, as a scientist who has been to talks and conferences and things like that have touched upon geoengineering, which I'll get into what that is in a moment. This is sort of is reminiscent of some of the things that they've talked about in those conferences. And so, what is geoengineering? Maybe we should start there. So, geoengineering is basically intentionally modifying the environment for some purpose. And usually this comes down to, well, we're already unintentionally modifying the environment, so let's modify it back through some mechanism. And this is often brought up with in terms of fighting global warming, that if we can't reduce our emissions to a certain level, we would need to figure out some way to reduce global temperatures. And this is usually done through some mechanism where you, like, say, basically put a lot of steam up in the atmosphere. Shoot up from the oceans a stream of high-altitude clouds that are able to block sunlight, thus reducing global temperatures. And I'm going to assume that CW7 is effectively doing that, but is intended to sort of hang in the upper atmosphere for a longer period of time.
I remember reading some kind of... I do not know how viable this would be, but it was someone's idea to basically disperse micro-reflective particles in the upper atmosphere that would be light enough to kind of just float around and reflect sunlight.
Yes. And so, get to the right density of material here, and it's lighter than air at lower altitudes, and heavier than air at higher altitudes, and there you go. Just sort of hangs out up there. The problem, though, is that of the research I've been able to observe, that it basically comes down to this: that if you have in the upper atmosphere this massive reflective particles or clouds or something like that, you start having more effects than you maybe want. And this usually comes into play as shifting weather patterns. So suddenly you have the Amazon rainforest getting as much rainfall as the Sahara Desert, and the Sahara Desert getting lots of rainfall instead. And so this can have further consequences of the environment, cause things to get potentially much worse in some areas.
You get into an interesting thing. Like, I think it was last episode we were talking about chaos theory and the butterfly effect.
Yes.
And you really get into that kind of thing once you start talking about a global system, because especially something like weather, we have this massive interconnected system of energy and movement that we do not understand. We have the barest surface level understanding of how this system interconnects and functions. And it is just too complicated to be able to very accurately predict what's going to happen.
Yeah, we can understand the individual parts, but getting them all in to work, a full understanding of all the parts working together is a bit outside of human ability to understand. We can build simulations, but even those are going to have a certain level of uncertainty. And so you get the different hurricane tracks from weather predictions, things like that.
Yeah. I think there's this really interesting example that my mind goes to with wind turbines. Now, I'm certainly not trying to make any broader comment about renewable energy as a system that we can incorporate into modern, power generating structures. But there's these massive wind turbine farms that they're putting up in places like California and some near like Nevada and Arizona, places with very wide open spaces and a lot of wind. And I've always had this thought, like as a kid, I had this thought, like, you are taking energy out of the wind and turning it into electricity.
Yes.
Like, isn't that going to affect the wind? And everyone kept saying, like, oh, no, of course not. That's not how it works. You're crazy. And then recently there was a study that found that places near wind farms are starting to see a mild temperature increase because they're changing the local weather systems by removing energy from this part of the weather system.
Yep. And you get air basically stagnating up, and it's not being sort of moved north or south depending on the seasons. And so your temperature tends to go up overall. So yeah, you are 100% correct. It's more of the matter of degrees, and so not in the temperature, but as in like how much energy is being extracted, and does it really matter? And perhaps it's more influential than people initially realized, or we've just gotten to a point where there's just so much wind farms that it is actually starting to pile up.
Yeah. Well, right now it's in very local areas.
Yeah.
And just so people don't misunderstand, I'm certainly not trying to say that we should not integrate wind farms, but there's pros and cons to all of these different things that we need to look into and not ignore. For example, like wind farms and solar farms tend to kill a great deal of wildlife, and we should look into how those effects are going to, work in a long term before we put them in on a mass scale. Like, I think this kind of thing with this movie and some other geoengineering type things almost always is used to kind of have some sort of chaotic, unexpected effect that is usually detrimental. And it's kind of exactly the same thing that we were doing with our current carbon emission problem.
Yep.
We took this system where we could burn coal and other things to create energy, and we thought that we could never have a big enough impact on a planet to change it. And we didn't actually bother looking into the long-term consequences of what we were doing. And now we're trying to do more or less the same thing again. I could see people rushing to something like this, atmospheric dispersal of a chemical to try to fix this massive issue we're having without spending enough time to research it, because they just believe that they need to do something quickly and not spend enough time researching and modeling and figuring out if there could be, potential hugely dangerous consequences.
Indeed. And so I'm overall, I generally lean on the side of scientists, not necessarily the push the cutting edge always activists. That we need to study these problems. We need to sort of take a step back and say, okay, we have this thing that could potentially do a lot of good, but we need to make sure it's not going to have unintended consequences that are going to be really, really bad.
Yeah, there's also a weird tendency that I've noticed with people to kind of consolidate these ideas. Like, we should switch over to wind farms, or we should switch over to solar farms, or just, like, we're so used to the idea of having one monolithic structure that we gain energy from, or whatever from. Like, if you were able to distribute it enough, like, let's have a couple of small solar farms here, and a wind turbine here, and a tidal generator here. We'll take a little energy from this place, and a little energy from this one, and a little energy from this one, and kind of just spread out the accumulated power drain.
A distribution through various different forms. This is also kind of one of the reasons that I'm still very pro-nuclear. Sure, a lot of the problems with it, are problems, but a lot of that also comes from that most of our reactors are kind of on the old side of things at this point in the U.S. So it's sort of we could actually make much more efficient and safer and cleaner nuclear power today than we could when we stop building new plants. But people are sort of scared because of all the issues previously. But it could also be kind of essential in the long run to have that alternative, so that all these renewable options are not going to pile up in ways we don't want.
Yeah, I feel like we kind of we have a tendency as a society to ignore evidence when we don't like it and go a lot with propaganda.
Yep.
And I think that interestingly, it ties into the way this movie is structured in a very good way. One of the things I was going to say with the train as societal metaphor, that this has been said a lot of times before, I'm by no means breaking new critical ground here, but the train is a long linear pathway. You only have two directions to move. And throughout the entirety of the movie, that is the decision that they keep kind of making, of like, do we continue forward or go back? We're stuck on this single line that's limiting our imagination and options.
Yes, it's either this or that. Nothing between, nothing else. No other options.
Yeah, it literally restricts lateral thinking.
And that, in fact, the classroom scene I only touched upon the how much propaganda is in that section, but the whole hymn about if you go outside you'll all freeze and die, is sort of like no, really, you shouldn't think about going with any other options, guys. Honestly, please don't.
Yeah, and it's got associated hand gestures. Like, they raise their hand to their forehead and kind of make a forward gesture with it, like, always move straight ahead. Like, keep going in the train direction, keep it going. It's inevitable that we continue moving forever. And every time they do this, it's like, everyone look to the side. You see how the side is dangerous and deadly? Let's keep going straight ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, see those people over there, the frozen bodies in the snow? Yeah, you don't want to be like them, guys. So, don't think about that option. It's dangerous.
Yeah, the classroom scene is this kind of the crux of the point of this movie. I saw this interesting video essay by the Nerd Writer, that does a very good YouTube channel of various movie interpretation things. So I want to give credit to that. He has this very, very good take that the back of the train is dingy and dirty and windowless.
Yes.
The middle of the train is kind of bright and colorful, has windows and plants and people going about what we would consider slightly more normal life activities, going to the dentist, being a tailor. There's a woman who's knitting in one of the gardens. Mm-hmm. And the further forward that they get, the fewer colors you get and the less windows you get until you reach the front section of the train where the super wealthy people supposedly live. And they are also trapped in colorless, windowless rooms.
Yes. Sure, the beats are fat, but, it's also very dark and kind of hazy in here.
So it's really a movie that focuses a lot on the midsection of the train. And if we're going with the societal metaphor, the midsection of the train is definitely supposed to be the middle class.
Where everything seems A-okay and everything's great. Don't worry about anything else.
They are so there's two sections. The one, you have the initial mob right before the kind of lower, super, super low classes. I think we should just define the class structure we're working with first, just so we can talk about it more clearly. Our characters are from the extreme lower classes. Mm-hmm. They are not even allowed to participate in this society in any way. They are basically the homeless and destitute.
Because they're treated worse than the prisoners in the prison section.
Yeah, they are behind the prisoners in the metaphor of the train. Now, the thing too is that they are not even a labor force in this world. They just exist at the back of the train, not allowed to do anything. They aren't given a task. They aren't allowed to participate in the society at all. They are just occasionally given these food bars.
And basically kept in their station by being physically removed from everybody else, but also having the resources limited. To the point that if they are in the early days that they were basically having to feed on each other, that they were were trapped there and didn't have any other option.
Yeah, and then they start to move forward and they go through kind of the food production, very low tier food production that would be kind of, I guess, the analogy of processed food and free government food that is kind of disgusting.
Yeah, and they run into Paul there, and he's like, well, it's just, I kind of, he doesn't want to join the revolution because, well, it's better than being in the back of the train where everyone else was. So comparatively, he's got it great now because they moved him up here.
Yeah, and the protein bar idea, I thought it was really interesting that they chose to represent it with insects as being kind of a disgusting foodstuff.
Oh.
It's just prepared badly.
Yes.
And it reminds me of kind of a Great Depression era government outreach in the United States, which I want to say this movie, though it is in English and it has a lot of American actors in it, this is not an American movie.
Yes.
This is a Korean movie that was filmed in the Czech Republic.
So a little bit of internationalists here.
Yeah. But that's also one of the things that I found very fascinating, that they were equating insects with this disgusting food stuff. That's a very, very Western idea.
Yes. Because a lot of other countries are all about the insectivorishness side of things.
Including South Korea, where the writer-director is from.
Maybe in sort of in South Korea, this is sort of making fun of Americans who don't like insects.
Possibly. Though, like, the food is just made very badly. And like a lot of our governmental kind of help for, even modern day like food kitchens, but it kind of originated during the Great Depression when many people couldn't feed themselves. Government kind of care packages and government issued food was always very, very bland and tasteless and disgusting, because it was believed that this would encourage people to try to work harder and, work their way out of these horrible circumstances where they're trapped with this kind of disgusting gruel.
If you're not suffering enough, then you're not motivated, right?
Yeah. Well, there were two things. I don't think the moralistic one enters into this movie as much. In the real world, in kind of the United States' very Puritan culture, especially at the time period when we were introducing kind of government food outreach, there was a belief that tasty, flavorful, spicy foods would lead to impure thoughts.
Oh no. You mean I'm going to covet things and think about, dirty things if I have a little bit of taste on my tongue?
Yeah, but a little bit.
Which might seem strange to us, but yeah, that's the thought there.
Yeah, well, arguably it's really kind of comes from a lot of racism, because immigrants at the time were coming from countries like Mexico and Italy and some places in Europe and Southeast Asia where they use a lot of spices.
Yes. So
it was kind of
scared of them, yeah.
Yeah, be scared of spices, be scared of these people bringing in spicy food.
It's going to be the downfall of society, I tells you.
So you get to that kind of weird food thing, which it's just emblematic of the way that the whole movie is structured, because they have enough food to feed people. They're just mismanaging it purposefully.
Yeah, and in fact, the Paul sort of comments about things are kind of not working as well as they used to in the food production area. The place is kind of falling apart, and that's why he has to sort of jump and grab the wheel as they are opening the door, and sort of forcing the pipe open.
Everything is kind of falling apart around them as they go through this, and everyone is very willfully ignoring that fact.
Yes, but the sacred engine is perpetual; it's going to last forever. Don't you know?
Yeah. And then so they move on from this food section into the quote-unquote middle class section of the train, which is the vast majority of it. And first they're faced by this faceless mob of oppressors who are organized. They are not in a particular uniform, but they are like all dressed the same. They are basically in uniform. They are egged on by officials in the back, the people who are running the train and the representative of Wilfred, the god engineer.
Yes.
And they are there specifically to prevent the forward movement of these disenfranchised people. You could interpret this very easily as kind of the police and military structures, because they are better equipped. They even have some slightly militarized gear once they get into kind of the dark fight section, and they are using like infrared goggles to see in the dark. They have a technological advantage.
You have no hope to survive, so don't even try. Go back now, otherwise we'll just sort of slaughter you all.
Yeah, and it's also implied that our point of view shots during this fight scene are being filmed. They are like an in-universe camera that is being used to shoot what is probably propaganda footage.
Oh, didn't really think about that, actually.
Yeah, because at one point the camera is pointing at I'm forgetting the character name. Tilda Swinton's messenger character.
Mason.
It's pointing at Mason, and she tells them to stop filming her and focus on the carnage.
Oh, yeah. Missed that bit.
And then we get into, after this, you have this rest period where they basically say, like, if we take the water supply section, we can control everything.
So it seems like a great idea, right?
Yeah, and then once they get there, this is revealed to be a false goal.
Like, it's not actually going to help us very much. It lets us control our own water supply, but...
But the interesting thing here is that it's only revealed through Mason Like, they're not supposed to get this information. This is like the foreshadowing that you get of like something's wrong.
Yeah, this is all sort of structured. This is sort of it's like they were only supposed to get so far and then get turned.
Yeah, but now I've spent 15 minutes going through the whole movie, which I shouldn't do. But so the bit that I was trying to focus on, getting to the classroom, yes. This is very visually called out. This is a very visually striking scene. There's a lot of bright colors. There's music. This is the indoctrination of the populace into this system of thinking.
Yeah, and you even have the folks there, the kids that have already been well steeped in this indoctrination. One of them basically stands up and starts insulting the people from the back, and it's like, oh, I think they don't have manners or something like that. And then Mason's like, no, they're merciful and kind, really.
Yes, and they give it a very kind of Sunday school vibe.
Mm-hmm. Oh, very much so.
I don't think that they're trying to do a critique of religion particularly, but I was taken to Sunday school as a kid, and this is that kind of classroom with the singing of hymns, the just kind of rote repeating and memorization of various phrases, and they show a like propaganda video early on for the supposedly for the classroom, but it's very clearly shot and shown as propaganda footage.
Indeed. And it's not even subtle either. It's sort of like, here are all the things that you should know and you should repeat. And there's sort of a call and response in some of the section as well between the teacher and the kids and the video and all that.
Yeah, and it's supposed to look slightly ridiculous to us. That's why this works as a very good kind of reflection of society style science fiction movie, because you can look at this society and go, well, this is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But it's doing a lot of very similar things to what we see mirrored in our own society. Yes.
So there's at least one big TV network in the US that video kind of reminds me of, honestly.
And this is the point. This is really interesting because they had opposition up to this point with the kind of people using axes at them. This is the point when they start facing more organized, like it's slightly more disorganized opposition, but this is where the guns come back into play.
It's more subtle. It's more I guess more not I'm trying to find the term. Precise, I guess.
Yeah, it's a more precise, but still slightly disorganized. And the guns are brought in with ritual. Mm-hmm. You have this ritually passed out egg, like New Year's egg cart going through that is being used to hide firearms. He's very literally calling out this kind of like community-wide ritual as a form of oppression.
Yeah, and he's handing out eggs to everyone, including the passengers with Curtis in his group. It's like, oh, everything's fine, everything's good. Yeah, don't pay attention to me other than, oh, this is just part of the normal habits of the train.
Yeah, but the entire thing is still very contrived because he hands Curtis very obviously and particularly an egg that has a message in it.
Indeed.
So this person who's handing out the eggs and is carting firearms to the back of the train knows what's happening. But after this, so they kind of seize the firearms. They take several casualties at this point, and they are able to seize the firearms. But from this point, until they get to the end of the train, they face no opposition from anyone else except for like the two government representatives that are chasing them.
Franco the Elder and a couple of the guards there, and sort of the Eggman who's at the back, but he's not chasing them. So.
Yeah, but every single other person on this train basically ignores them.
Like, oh, there's some people coming through. That's weird.
Until they get to the final assault on like the core power structure. Once they get to the engine of the train, all of the super wealthy people they just passed start to try to swarm.
Wait a moment, we need to stop this, man.
But you get the very lower, like if you're going off of the train structure, you get kind of the lower middle classes, like military police kind of thing, which we draw very heavily on from the kind of the upper lower classes and the lower middle classes, that kind of divide. In the United States, at least, is where we tend to draw on people to go into our industrial power structures, our military and police force.
If you're, your daddy's runs a big business, then you're probably going to have a job doing that when you grow up. So why even think about a time in the armed forces or working as a police officer? You're gonna be set for life already, right?
Yeah. So they pass that gatekeeping power structure, and then they pass the slightly more subtle controlled power structure of the school. And after that, no one cares what they do. All the people in the middle are presented as so apathetic that they are background.
Like the lady in the sauna who Yona like hides behind her, and she's like, the lady's like, what are you doing? When Franco looks in the sauna door there, and it's like, you have someone hiding right behind you, and you just don't care.
And I think Yona's very interesting, because I was watching some critiques of this, and they mentioned this philosopher called Slavoj Žižek, which I'm mispronouncing. It's I believe like a Slavic name that I don't know how to pronounce well. Yes. So I don't agree with all of his philosophical takes on things, but he has this kind of interesting thing about ideologies, and he uses a lot of movie metaphors to explain how people's thinking is trapped in modern ideologies. And Yona is kind of the true seer character of this movie, in the same way you kind of get with They Live.
So when you can sort of see beyond what's being presented.
Yeah, because you have the They Live movie with the sunglasses, where when he puts on these special sunglasses, he can see, what actual alien propaganda and things on billboards and advertisements.
Indeed. The stuff that everyone is just sort of absorbing without realizing it.
Yeah. So you get Yona, she's introduced as kind of a clairvoyant. She's introduced as a seer type character. It's never really explained, but she always knows what's behind the next door. And then once you get to the final part of the movie, Chris Evans, his name Curtis, his name is way too close to Chris. So I keep it's Chris Evans.
Yes, Chris Curtis Evans, the train guy. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's being tempted into taking over this structure of this system. He's so trapped in this kind of back and forth train mentality in this movie that he gets to the end, and he's being swayed into this idea that the only way to continue the world going is to take over the system and basically keep things about the same.
New boss, same as the old boss sort of situation. Yeah.
Until Yona uses her true seeing to kind of reveal the literal dark underside of what's going on.
Sort of like, you remember how much it sucked in the back? I know you're kind of looking at this place up front and how shiny it is, but look, they have a small child basically engaged in perpetual manual labor forever, buried in the floor. You should probably think about that.
Yeah. It's a very interesting kind of cyclical cycle that we're getting here. He literally mentioned earlier, how Gillian sacrificed his own arm to save a child years ago. And now he is sacrificing his own arm to save a child. He is so trapped in this ideological way of thinking. These are the only options he sees. This is the only way for me to be a great leader, is to do exactly the same thing that my mentor did, even though my mentor has been revealed to simply be playing into the same system that I am supposedly fighting against. Now, you hit that with kind of Namgun. I'm going to mispronounce this name.
Namgu Minsu?
Yeah, Namgu Minsu and Yona are middle class characters. They're in the prison, but they are above. They're in the windowed section of the train.
They were naughty, but that's where their origins come from.
They are the lateral thinkers. Because you get to the end, and it's revealed this entire time that Namgun was his entire goal through the entire thing going along with this rebellion was to get out of the train, and Curtis thinks he's crazy.
You're gonna go out there and die, man. Seriously, what are you even thinking?
And he reveals the thing about the airplane. He tells him that he's seen this airplane and the snow is obviously melting. Something you didn't mention is he's about to tell him something else he saw.
He saw something else, but it's not. He just kind of brushes it off.
Well, he basically decides, you wouldn't believe me if I told you. You're so trapped in this way of thinking, you won't believe that I saw something else out there. And I think we're kind of led to believe that it was some sign of life because of the polar bear we see at the end of the movie. But who knows? He could have seen people out there. He never says.
Yeah, there could be, more than, just a handful of survivors elsewhere in the world. Just everything we've been told is that these are the only people in the world. But what if that's not true?
We get this very interesting thing with the ambiguity of the ending. There's two things that I really like about the ending. So the ending, he blows up the side of the train just to get them out. He has no intent. He wants to open a door in the side of the train. He really doesn't seem to have any intention other than opening a pathway to the outside world. It kind of incidentally destroys the train.
Yes. In a way, would it make sense for there to be any other way?
Yeah, well, there's two things that I like about this. One, you have the sort of obvious metaphor. Like, we are so trapped in this linear way of thinking that the only way out is to destroy the system entirely. You have to destroy the literal linearity of the world in order to break free of it. But I was watching this. I saw this avalanche start after they had the explosion set off. And it's like, this train goes by this mountain once a year in this incredibly snowy environment. Now, I've done a lot of outdoor hiking in those kind of areas when I was younger. They teach you about avalanches all the time. This was inevitable.
Yes. And at some point, the avalanche would come.
At some point, the avalanche or one of these ice blocks, just something, was going to derail this train.
Just a matter of time before it happened.
Yeah, this was expedited by the revolution and this breaking free of the train system, but the train's failure is an inevitability.
Yeah, despite all the propaganda to the contrary.
Yeah, even he talks about how the engine is eternal, but not all of its parts are.
Yes. So it's sort of like, are you saying the physical engine is eternal? Well, that's obviously not true, but it's sort of maybe implied that this is the structure, the society. He's arguing for that being eternal. That is something that you just can't fight against. You can't resist. It will be there forever. Well,
Yeah, and he has this thing of like, I can use child labor to replace parts, and that's an obviously flawed that's obviously a flawed makeshift system. Yeah. There's fine. You can use the kid to like clean out waste from one of the mechanisms or whatever it is he's implied to be doing. You're never going to be able to use a kid to replace a drive shaft.
Yep. Maybe they've tried. Ugh.
Yeah, that's some bad thoughts.
Yeah. Well, this train's all about the bad thoughts. Let's be honest.
Yes. Not only is the kind of train, the train system failure is presented as an inevitability. The fact that he chose a polar bear to represent continuing life in the outside world. The first time I saw this was like, oh, it's a very commonly associated snow animal. So, okay. But no, it's not just a commonly associated snow animal. It is an apex predator.
Yep. It means it can eat, it's eating something.
Yes, the existence of a large apex predator implies a fully functioning
Correct.
ecosystem.
And not only that, but there's an apex predator on top of a freaking mountain, man. Like,
Yeah, and so this is the thing that I believe we're meant to imply from this. If a polar bear has been able to survive in this environment for 18 years, so could
Yes.
humans.
and so there is hope for the future. Yeah.
Well, not only hope for the future. It's not I don't think this is necessarily a hopeful moment. This is the entire exercise was unnecessary.
Correct.
It's basically just underscores the futility of the entire system. They spent their entire, like, some people, especially like Yona, who is one of the only survivors, the two survivors that we see, the only two confirmed people to live through this, spent their entire lives in this system.
They do nothing else.
In what are implied to be very bad circumstances. For no reason.
Yep. Just an assertion, a preordained, line keeps coming up that keeps insisting that, what is as it can only be. And so...
Yeah, like they have the whole, Wilfred knew that the world was going to freeze and created this magical train for all of us.
I don't believe he knew, but anyway...
Yeah, he either didn't know, or maybe he was able to recognize it sooner. We don't know. It doesn't really matter. But the fact is, he used this opportunistically to enforce his ideas of power on a group of people.
And so he's basically trapped the people in the train intentionally. And, I was like, oh, I'm a prisoner too, despite me being...
Yeah, he talks about everyone being a prisoner in this society. And all of, like, a lot of the people, we don't get as much. So, like, the very last car we see before the engine is a drug den.
A bunch of people spaced out on Crenole, and in fact, I think that might be one of the motivations why they they get so upset with Nimgoon. Because he just took all their drugs, man.
Yeah, but we're kind of meant to have this implication that they are just as bad off as the people in the beginning of the movie. They are all lying around in, like, slightly confined spaces, like high on drugs, the same way that everyone in the back of the car is in slightly confined spaces. Some of them high on drugs. He has a drug dealer in the back.
And, it also kind of brings up the question of where are they getting this cannoli from, like, on both ends of the train?
Yeah, well, they talk about it being an industrial waste product.
From where?
From the engine, supposedly.
So it has to be coming through somehow, filtering through trade of some sort.
Well, the system that they have in place, the eternal engine that keeps them all alive, is producing a hallucinogenic drug for them that keeps them contained. Yep. And this is an interestingly kind of hippie pro-drug movie. Because the drug is keeping certain people in line. It's keeping the upper classes docile. It's preventing a certain mobility of the lower classes. You have the main Namgoon character is said to be a drug addict, and he's the only one that, like, he designed parts of the train, so he has this intimate knowledge of how to manipulate the system, and he's kind of a drug addict. But then the drug is used to break your way out of this linear system of thinking.
Get your drugs, and then suddenly you can sort of knock yourself, sideways.
Which is very much this kind of tune in, tune out mentality that you have for the hippie movement in the American 1960s and 70s.
Where you basically get yourself enough of the drugs, and then you can sort of see how the world really works.
Yeah, and I think it's very telling that the cannoli is implied to be a hallucinogen. which, as we've talked about a surprising number of times in this show, hallucinogens have some very profound effects on the way the brain handles creativity.
Yes.
And it is, in fact, been used in some of these counterculture movements as a way to critique the system that we live in. And it's been implied very heavily. I don't know how particularly true this is, or if it's just something that they can associate with countercultural movements, but it's been heavily implied in certain circles that the paranoia and laws against certain kinds of drugs, especially hallucinogens, are a way to help maintain the governmental power structure by eliminating these things that cause the questioning of it.
If you are able to erase the borders in your way of thinking, you're still left with the borders that you don't realize exist. But if you have something that helps you sort of observe those that you wouldn't be able to, spot otherwise, then you can also call those into question as well. And then suddenly all the bounds and restrictions being placed upon you, you can sort of see through them and see what they are. And thus you can say, maybe a better way can be had, a different way of being.
Yeah. We've covered a lot of stuff, and I think we're actually running I was surprised we were able to get all of our points in this quickly, but there was one last thing that I kind of wanted to cover, which we touched on a little earlier. Mm-hmm. We talked about how this exercise is definitely unnecessary. One, because they have this ecosystem existing outside of the train.
Yes, that you just can't observe.
Yeah, but the other thing is this closed ecological system that they keep going on about. This is a closed ecological system inside of the train. It has to be tightly controlled and managed in order for us all to survive. It's being managed just so badly in such an obvious way.
Yep. Excess for some, not anything except the bare minimum for others, and sometimes not even then.
Yeah, and we see this entire system, like you said, excess for some people, the bare minimum for others, distributed in this completely uneven way that isn't even utilizing the labor force that they have. Now, I guess you could kind of claim that the thing is automated to an extent that you don't need that much of a labor force, which would go along with the metaphor of kind of the back-end passengers being kind of the homeless, disenfranchised people who are no longer necessary to work.
Yes, I think the general phrasing that's often used these days is this train sort of appears to be living in the late capitalism era, where everyone's used to have a job of a physical sort has been replaced by machines.
Yeah, and there's this. I happened to get prepped for this, so
excellent.
There's a piece of this that just shows how completely mismanaged this is, and how the culture, in fact, is even contributing to that mismanagement. And it is the protein bars that they feed to the lower class passengers.
Yes. Yeah, I wonder what those taste like.
Yeah, they are shown to be kind of disgusting, and they're turned into some sort of weird gelatin. They look like weird Jell-O bars.
Yes.
Some kind of aspic, which is a kind of like boiled meat Jell-O.
Oh yeah, and it's all wobbly too, and doesn't look too appetizing when they eat. When Mason eats it, because she's not used to it. While all the passengers are like, "Oh, yum! This is my food. It's the only thing I've been able to eat for about 17 years."
And the fact is that they are going out of their way to make these disgusting. Because it is harder to process insects in that way.
Yep. Just basically grinding them up.
Yeah, this is the thing. So insects are starting to be used a little more and more in food production in the West. They've always been kind of eaten in a lot of countries. Europeans somehow wound up with this weird phobia of eating insects.
Now, maybe it's like the lice from or not the lice, the fleas from the Black Death that everyone freaked out.
Well, nobody really understood that was caused by fleas at the time.
True.
It's been around for a bit. I haven't been able to find a lot of information for where that came from, so if anyone does happen to know, I'd be fascinated to find out. But
Tell us about bugs in Europe.
it's being reintroduced because it is a very low maintenance, energy efficient, sustainable food supply. And I got this thing in prep for this episode called an EXO bar.
What is an EXO bar?
Yeah, you can go to the website and order these. They're EXO protein bars, and they are made of something called cricket meal.
This sounds very, very hopping interesting here.
So I'll read you the back of the bar here. It says, the closest thing to perfect protein source cricket power has more protein than beef, more iron than spinach, is very high in biotin, B12, and zinc.
So in other words, if you eat this, you're going to become like stronger than Popeye.
Yes. This is actually a mixed bar. It says it's mixed with whole egg whites, almonds, and peas to create, different flavors. One thing that you do get with insects, this isn't the first time I'm going to eat insects, is this bar. Like crickets and things like that go through a process called gut loading. So people kind of ask, what do insects taste like? And it's a fairly nonsensical question because insects taste like whatever they last ate.
Yep. So if you're, giving them grain, they're going to be, tasting a bit like that. If you're going to be giving them, something a little more meaty, well, guess what?
And this says, requires less water, take up less land, water, and feed produce, less greenhouse gas emissions than any other animal protein source.
That seems like the green future of our destiny, eh?
Yeah, a lot of people think so, and there's a lot of companies working towards that in the US right now. And now I'm going to actually try this thing. If I can open it ever. I hate protein bars, it's packaging.
The crinkling of the package. The foil.
Yeah, I have to pick it up on the audio because no one can see what I'm actually doing.
Well, I can certainly hear it.
That smells pretty good. This is called this one is a cookie dough bar, chocolate chip cookie dough flavored cricket bar.
So they've been eating cookies.
Yeah. I got it in a 3-pack. There was just a standard chocolate and I think a chocolate mint or almond something and a cookie dough.
Cool.
I very literally wouldn't be able to tell the difference between this and a power bar.
Huh. So a successful experiment, hey?
Except I forgot to grab any water, so my mouth is going to be sticky.
Well, maybe I should talk a little bit about something. What else do I got here? Now, I guess I could talk about why I'm kind of glad you're doing the experiment here. My taste buds tend to be a little on the crazy side, and sometimes even like foods that I would normally like really enjoy. If there's just something slightly off about it, I can actually really pick it up. It's very strange. So it's sort of. I'm glad you are the one who is willing to do this for the show here instead of myself here.
That does happen sometimes, but like we have this phobia of eating insects in the Western world that is holding back an entire range of food production options.
Correct.
During a time when worldwide we are facing this kind of borderline food crisis. Even in parts of the US, there's food deserts, there's places in America where it's very difficult to get fresh, well-produced produce. We have, meat subsidies that keep meat from skyrocketing in price, but it's very energy intensive to produce. Mm-hmm. It's hard to distribute our food evenly. And our way of thinking that we have accepted without question is just kind of limiting the options that we can even use to help solve these problems. And I wanted to call out the insects specifically because I know that I have eaten them before. And when I first saw this, it's like, those are just being made incorrectly. Yep. Those bars are just being made badly for no reason other than to give the poor unappetizing and unnutritious food.
Well, I do have maybe a kind of creepy maybe a side explanation for some of this here. If you're willing to get kind of like, with me.
May as well.
All right. So, as we find out near the end of the movie, that at the back of the train, there was like 1,000 some people crammed in the very back car of the train. There's like maybe 100 at this point. So what have they been feeding the insects?
Yeah, that's true.
So just a reprocessing of what they had before. Yeah.
I mean, possibly. They don't really go into what they're feeding the insects. Insects can live off all kinds of things. You hit a problem, and you hit problems with every part of this society. And you do it specifically because the way that the society is structured is just fundamentally flawed.
It's a society built around an ideology, not a what should actually be done sort of way of thinking.
Yeah, and the fundamental flaws are obvious and they're right there, and not addressing them. Like, I think most people are meant to watch this movie, take it purely as metaphor, not address the fundamental problems. And it's a very clever way of making you think of how trapped in a linear way of thinking you are in these various societal issues.
So I will say that, at this point, it is a little surprising we haven't talked about Karl Marx yet.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of an interesting one because they don't call out any particular ideology per se. They very obviously work in a lot of multiculturalism. There's a lot of different languages on the train. The English seems to be a default, but we're not meant to believe that that's like something that's enforced necessarily.
Yes, in Mason's first speech to the passengers, they actually have translators that start speaking up, and she's like, "No, don't bother."
Yeah, we just don't have time for that. But it's like, even when talking to the like lowest of the low in this society, they bother to have translators. Like, English isn't considered enough of a default language to feel derisive about anyone who doesn't speak it. So it's not calling out any particular system. We never see any money. There's some like low-level bartering that they do in the back section because they don't have a lot of things. But we never see any hints that this is a capitalist society. We never see what kind of society it is. I'm forgetting the name offhand. It seems to be implied to be like a very old sort of Bronze Age governmental system where the leader gets to control the production and population as they see fit.
Sort of a pre-feudalism sort of state in a way.
It's tempting to have something come in with something like Marxism, and one of the reasons that we had Salvoj Zinke, dang it.
I'm not sure how to pronounce it.
Yeah. One of the reasons that we had the philosopher earlier, the Zek. I'm just keeping some of those pronunciations in there. One of them is going to be close. Dang it. He just has this quote that is very applicable to this movie. That is, it is easier for people to imagine the end of all life on Earth than the relatively smaller change in upending capitalism. So in this movie is very much about upending a system. But what that system is left very ambiguous. It's just a system that no longer functions and never did. That people are trapped in. It's
sort of laying out a power structure that simply is, and you can kind of put into, that power structure any other ideology power structure that it brings about a power structure and apply it to this the situation in the train. You can sort of argue as like, oh, this is obviously capitalist system because it started out with everyone with the tickets originally, and how much you could pay. The people up front paid for the best tickets, so they got up in the nicest area supposedly, and then on down to the passengers in the back who didn't have a ticket at all. They just kind of hitched a ride, and but then you can also say, well, that doesn't really apply to this part of the how the status quo is. It's very much, as you said, the sort of this Bronze Age structure, and maybe in a a different way you could toss in other different sort of interpretations of the power structure. But at the end of the day, though, it's all a critique of this sort of tiered power structure. Someone up control up the front, the various different levels of privilege and ability and access to resources throughout the levels, with the far end having pretty much none.
Yeah, any unequal system can project itself onto this movie. And I think that's the reason that it was left so ambiguous.
And I think that's a very good point. A very good move.
A lot of people do, like you said, bring up Marx in connection to this. But Marx is very much a direct critique of capitalist thinking.
Yes.
And we are projecting capitalist thinking onto this movie because that's the system that we exist in. And,
and folks that are very critical of, communism is like, well, we're all, places like the USSR also have power structures that you have a guy at the top who's basically in control, and there's various tiers of power below that. And
yeah, you could very equally use this movie as a critique of modern communism. It's a critique of any structure that has an unequal distribution of resources.
And so maybe we should be looking beyond these, basic ideologies, and their, tier systems to, find or try to create something that doesn't have this.
Yeah, I mean, they bring it down to such a base level because the people in the back deserve less than the people in the front because that is the way it is. That is Mason's catchphrase. So it is.
Yes. No questioning it. We're not even going to discuss it.
Yeah. So why are they there? Because they deserve to be there. Now, that's basically how every society interprets the people at the very bottom and the very top. They deserve to be there. Whether that is through some sort of divine preordained notion of class structure, whether that's through what we believe in the United States, where we perceive it as a meritocracy, where people's actions have influenced their place in society, whether it's just some sort of random assortment of people and you don't really believe there's a power behind it, it's just how things happen to exist. You can give this any one of those interpretations because they've stripped it down to the very basest elements of a class-based tier society.
You might as well be, calling, Mason and Claude, ladies, lords and things like that. And, Wilford is the king or emperor, and it would be the same sort of thing, It's like,
yes.
Oh, they have these positions because that is how things are supposed to be, how it's only right and just.
Well, I think that we've talked about most of the politics, science, and philosophy that we wanted to bring up, which means it's time for the galaxy's favorite game show!
So, everybody, I hope you enjoyed your train experience. Make sure to punch your tickets and buckle on in. So, for today's first award, we are giving the first award to Wilford. We're giving him what award? The Willy Wonka Award for trying to find his successor via convoluted means of, tests and deception and getting people killed. What does he win, Gepwin?
Wilford has won an inexplicably complicated machine that we're supposed to believe works better for no reason other than the creator is eccentric and weird.
I think he certainly fits with this one today. Our second award is the Not Dead Yet Award, which goes to Franco the Elder for seemingly rising from the dead after being strangled and stabbed in the gut. What does he win, Gepwin?
Franco the Elder wins being a representation of a dictatorially enforced class structure that is so unthinkingly applied to create virtual zombies of the enforcing class.
Oh, I think he's getting a little more spooky than I thought he was, and he's pretty dang spooky already. Our third award is the I'm a Humanitarian Award, which goes to Curtis, because during that first month of the train, he certainly wasn't a vegetarian. What does he win, Gepwin?
Curtis wins strange meat or any other sci-fi euphemism for cannibalism that you care to mention.
Well, he doesn't make use of those in the movie, so it's probably good he gets a few. Our last award is the Marks or Bust, Revolutionary Award, which goes to Namgun Minsu for wanting to not have just a change of leadership, but to, take down the whole society and get out of there, man. When does he win, Gepwin?
Namgu Minsu wins a hipster t-shirt that probably has Che Guevara on it.
He can, I'm not sure it's going to be of much use out in the cold, but, well, he gets kind of incinerated anyway, so whatever.
Well, that'll do it for our awards today. Thanks to all of our contestants for playing, even though you have all died and or frozen to death.
Indeed.
And thank you for joining us on the galaxy's favorite game show.
Woo-hoo! Ha! Yeah!
Well, we made it through Snowpiercer in a somewhat reasonable amount of time. I'm kind of surprised.
Yeah, it's kind of a long movie.
Overall, I'd enjoy it a little more when I'm thinking about it. There's something about watching it that I just can't get my head around.
Well, it is kind of anxiety-inducing.
Yeah, I think it might be anxiety-inducing. I think with my kind of childhood background, it makes me start to dissociate a little bit, and it makes it a little harder to pay attention to some of the finer points while I'm watching it directly.
Yeah. Now, my initial pass-through of my notes, I had, way more of the small little details everywhere, and that's only because I've seen the movie several times. Wait a moment, did they just... Oh, I should be paying attention to that.
Yeah, I hit a point. I hit the school scene, and I was like, there's a lot of masks and drawings on the walls, and they're probably all there for a reason, but all I'm thinking is oh, hey, look, a school.
Yep. Sometimes there's sort of symbology and things in an environment in a movie that more gets the back of your brain working to sort of help you build the feeling of the situation without actually consciously sort of acknowledging it. And yeah, that's very much sort of going on there.
Yeah. Well, next week we are going back to Star Trek: The Original Series.
Oh, we are?
Yes.
Some sort of Star Trekking across the universe once more?
Yes. Only going forward. We can't find reverse. Very much like Snowpiercer.
Oh, but yes.
Tied it in.
Wait a moment. Star Trek is set in the Snowpiercer universe? Oh, God.
It might be. We don't know. The next Star Trek episode we're going to be watching is episode 20, called Court Martial.
I wonder if someone gets court-martialed in this one.
You'd hope so. Though the last episode where someone was court-martialed was called Menagerie.
Wait a moment. Maybe there's a some sort of celebration or a masked a ball in this one then.
Oh yeah, that could be. How many times are people going to get court-martialed in this series?
I'm not sure. Well, I guess maybe we should have a running tally. So
yeah,
this will be time 2.
So far we've got 2. Yeah. Well, we can find out more about that next week. Join us on Watchers of Tomorrow for Star Trek Original Series episode 20. Court Martial.
Next time on Watchers of Tomorrow, Kirk's finally put on trial for negligence and endangerment of his crew. You have been listening to Watchers of Tomorrow, a podcast on science fiction media. Find and follow Watchers of Tomorrow on Podbean, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, Spreader, Digital Podcast, and perhaps many more to come. If you enjoy our podcast, make sure to subscribe for more. And where possible, make sure to rate your experience or leave us a review. You may find Gepwin on youtube.com/Gepwin and Twitter @Gepwin. You may find me, Dr. Izix, on youtube.com/Dr. Izix and Twitter @IzixLP. Music is Waveform and Maury's Principle, both by DRKRN. You can also check out the Watchers of Tomorrow Discord channel. Make sure to share the experience with your friends, family, enemies, and alien overlords. If you feel you are suffering from transporter syndrome, please be aware that the next time you step off the transporter, that you, that is now, no longer exists.